As many of you might know, Danny from Nerd on a Budget was one of my earliest subscribers and has become one of my biggest supporters. Therefore, it only stands to reason that I challenge him to open combat and try to shame him publicly. Now, originally, he had proposed that we do a $300 budget build-off using new parts. But if you watch my channel on a regular basis, you know that's not really something I can stomach. I just know that there are better deals to be had out there buying used components, so I just couldn't fucking bring myself to do it. And I said, Danny, why don't we try something just a little bit different? Now, doing something like Scrapyard Wars just was not an option because that's been done to death. What if we scoured the internet for a fully functioning computer with no other conditions attached? And we cleaned it up, tore it down, puttered it out, and did whatever it took, short of lying of course, to try to flip it for a profit. The purpose of this challenge is simple. We want to demonstrate to you that you can take just a little bit of money and turn it into a little bit of more money, and that it is indeed possible to turn one man's trash into another man's treasure. Anyhow, as you might have gathered, this is my entry into the two-part competition, and you can see the other part of this on Danny's channel, which I will link in the description below, and I will put a big thing up on the video here. But in reality, this video actually started a few videos ago for me, because if you do recall my bargaining advice video, I showcased a system that I purchased for $280 that I hinted would be included in a future video, and that's exactly what ended up happening. Anyhow, we each had different ideas about what would be the best way to sell all this shit. I was going to go for the teardown approach and sell all the parts individually, while he was going to clean it up and try to repackage it and sell it as a full system. Now, his methodology is very sound. A lot of people underlist their items as is, and you can simply just go pick it up, dust it out, take better pictures of it, list it better, and flip it for a profit right there. That is definitely a legitimate strategy and will work 9 times out of 10 if you know what you're doing and you have the experience. But in my case, I thought it would be a better idea to part the thing out and sell each component individually because the system as a whole is somewhat mismatched. You've got an R9 270, a Lian Li HTPC case, 6 gigabytes of RAM, and a 120 gigabyte SSD, which all make for a perfect little Steam TV box kind of thing. But you got it paired with an i7-920 on a P16 motherboard with a Seasonic AX850. Those are all enthusiast components, and this thing is meant to serve as an HTPC, so it doesn't really make sense to sell it as a whole. The best way for me to go was to tear it out. Now, before we get to the results, I'll remind you all that I paid $280 for that system the day I bought it, and it doesn't really matter that I paid Canadian dollars and live in Toronto and that Danny is going to be paying American dollars for his system, because we're looking for a percentage increase over what we paid here. So we're going to make this whole competition currency neutral. But enough of the preamble, on to the results. Now, as I've said in the past, X58 motherboards that are still working are in great demand, and there is a very good reason for that. We know motherboards don't last nearly as long as the CPUs that they support. Motherboards are typically good for anywhere from maybe 3 to 5 years on average, but they have a wildly varying lifespan, as where CPUs can sometimes be good for up to 15 years as long as they're kept in relatively cool conditions. Since the CPUs that the X58 platform supports is so wide-ranging, all the way from the i7-920 all the way up to the i7-990X, there's a lot of people out there with a wide variation of chip strengths that may or may not be willing to upgrade from that platform should something go wrong with the motherboard. So if you assume that for every one CPU on the socket was sold for every one motherboard, over time this disparity sort of forms between them as motherboards die and CPUs remain resilient. Now, people who have i7-920s aren't going to be so encouraged to stay on the same platform should something go wrong with their motherboard because, well, the motherboards get exceedingly expensive and upgrading to something new would just be better, considering it's still just a quad-core with hyperthreading and now 6 generations old. But people with 990Xs, oh, they're in a different position. They've got a very good chip even by today's standards. Yes, the single-threaded performance is not going to be quite as good, but if you're a content creator, those 6 cores and 12 threads give you a huge advantage over your average consumer i7 today, even by today's standards if you account for multi-threaded workloads only. So that said, you can see why X58 motherboards are still in demand to this day by people who really like the platform and have a high-end chip for it. You can expect the same thing to happen with X79 as it continues to age, and X99. That's just the nature of the enthusiast platform. There's a lot of range in terms of the CPU quality, and the people at the top are always looking for backups when their boards fail. So naturally the P16 motherboard was the premium piece of this build, and I knew I could get a lot of money for it if I just positioned it right and was willing to wait a little bit. Now originally I listed that and the CPU together as a combo for $220, and really the CPU itself is worth practically nothing, so I expected the person who messaged me to be primarily interested in the board. So I got a message for an offer of $180 on just the board. He was going to allow me to keep the CPU, and I figured maybe I can get 20-30 bucks for the CPU, so I decided to go for it. In retrospect, knowing what I know now, I probably wouldn't have bitten so fast. I had a considerable amount of time until the deadline came up. Probably could have waited and squeezed a few more dollars out of it, but $180 for that board is still a fair deal. They go for about $200 on eBay, but that's usually including shipping, so I just decided, what the fuck, good enough. Next up we had the power supply, which I will admit I went into a little bit greener than I do with most things, because I don't often sell a lot of high-end power supplies, and I will often keep them to use them in full builds. And when I say high-end, the AX series from Corsair has always been their top tier units, but there is a huge difference in quality between the original AX series and the AXI series that later replaced it. The original AX series was ODM'd by Seasonic, as where the AXI series was made by Flextronic, which is actually a server grade ODM. They don't do a lot of retail stuff, and they were specially commissioned for the AXI line alone. So there's a huge disparity in quality, and I figured, given that, and given the age of the original AX power supply that I had, I figured I just couldn't find somebody that was going to be willing to pay triple digits for the thing, so I listed it for $80, and it got picked up almost immediately. It wasn't 2 days later after listing it that it just went out the door. Some guy was just like, hell yeah, I'll give you fucking asking price for that, and then they just came over, they bought it, 80 bucks in hand, and left. At that point I knew I probably could have done a little bit better, because when things sell that quickly, considering you have over 2 months to offload it, you're probably getting a little screwed. So at this point, motherboard and power supply together equaled 260 bucks. And even though I feel like I probably shortchanged myself, I was still a mere $20 away from breaking even and counting all the rest as profit. And next up, we have the Asus R9 270 that came with the build, which I sold for 70 bucks after asking for 80, which is a perfectly reasonable price. And this is case in point that all products have a range in terms of buying and selling, and you want to try and sell on the high and buy on the low, because the next day I bought a Club 3D version of the same card for $50. Now it could have something to do with the fact that Club 3D is not as recognizable a name, and it could also have to do with the fact that it was only a one-fan version of the card and clocked a little bit lower, I guess. But the bottom line is that generally speaking, there is a range for every product, and it is up to you and things like time and availability that will dictate whether or not the product ends up selling on the high end or the low end. Anyhow, if you tack that 70 bucks onto the total so far, that puts us up to a grand total of $330, which put that a firm $50 into the black. And then we come to the case, which was a Lian Li C60 or something like that. I don't remember the exact model number. It's an HTPC case. They make all kinds of fucking cases. They're like the Rule 34 of computer cases. If the concept exists, Lian Li's definitely made a case of it. I ended up listing it for 60 bucks, being optimistic. I usually don't sell cases for anywhere near that much, because cases are everywhere, and like I've said before, they're virtually free if you look hard enough. But this was a bit of a specialty case. It was light, it was of good quality, so I figured, maybe I'll get a biter. I did. He came right over like 4 days later after I listed it. He was willing to pay my asking price until he saw that one of the drive cages was missing, which I didn't even know about, to be honest. When I inspected it, I didn't even notice there were screw holes there, so I said, okay, well, I'm sorry, buddy, but I think I'll just hold on to it then. And he went away for a few days, but then came back a few days after that and said, actually, I think I can deal with the fact that it's missing a drive cage, as well as a few other small things here and there. Would you take 40? I hemmed and hawed about it. I was like, well, I do have 2 months left. I have a lot of time. I'm selling things really quick. I can afford to wait, I thought. But then I just was like, it's an HTPC case, and maybe I shouldn't count my chickens before they hatched, or whatever euphemism fits here. And I just sold it for 40 bucks. So for those of you counting at home, that leaves us with a $370 net return for a $90 profit and 4 components left to go, 3 of which are sitting right here. So I have 3 Munchkin sticks still sitting here in my possession. We got an i7 920. We can add to the pile. I got a few others. And here is the 120 gigabyte Samsung 840 SSD. Perfectly good. Gonna keep that for later. But the reason why I decided not to sell them, and I actively decided not to sell them, I didn't even bother listing them, is because I use these in builds regularly. And although I probably could have gotten a few bucks for the RAM, a 3x2 configuration is not really ideal for sale. You can certainly get some degree of money per gigabyte better for a 2x2 package or a 4x2 package for obvious reasons, but not a lot of people have a need for 3. So I'll just wait until I get a 4th Munchkin stick that matches and throw it in a build for a client. As for the SSD, as you guys know, I have lots of these, and I could have just listed this one individually and sold it for like 30 bucks, but why? And as for the i7 920, like I said, add it to the pile. I'm thinking of building a castle out of them at some point because I have quite a few and they're pretty fucking useless at this point. And the last component that I had that was left over was actually the Noctua U9S that was cooling this thing. But unfortunately, the seller of the system only had the 1366 bracket, so I was kind of stuck with that. Now, I could have probably tried to sell it as is, and I'm sure that there is somebody out there in the city of Toronto who would have wanted it, but it's, again, just the kind of thing that probably better to use when you can use it. And I had another system that I had put together recently that I was looking to sell, and this cooler fit just fine in it, so I figured I would use it there and get rid of it in that build. So we'll call all of this 0. So ultimately I end with a $90 net return on a $280 investment for a percentage increase of, carry the one, 32.14%. So I guess that means that Danny beat me by about 2% because the rules of our competition state that we would simply be taking a percentage profit and calling the person who had more a winner. And in this case, that would be him. I mean, I got a bunch of extra shit out of it, but it was my decision to hold on to it, so congratulations, Danny. I suffered as a result of my hubris. But as I'm sure you gathered, that's not really the point of this competition. Both he and I are primarily interested in making your lives a little easier and showing you that you have many avenues available to you to get yourself in the position to where you have the financial means to get what you want. No matter where you live in the world, as long as you're in a reasonably populated area, get searching and get to it and get yourself some of this. I'm pretty sure if you're watching my video, you already subscribed to him, but just in case you don't, all of his links are down in the description. I would encourage you to check him out. He's fantastic. He makes excellent videos with much better production quality than I've got, but with less dick jokes. So whatever you prefer. And you can be sure that he and I will be doing something again in the future. This is going to be a long and fruitful cross-continental relationship. Well, I'm the bitch now, apparently, because I lost by 2%. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.